Hi guys, and welcome to the Ace Tanker for the Ferdinand, the Tier 8 German tank destroyer, at least one of them, the one that isn't the Jagdpanther 2. This is, like the video earlier on today, a tank that made its first appearance at the Battle of Kursk in July 1943, and it's another tank that I rebought just like the Panther earlier in order to get an Ace Tanker in. The Ferdinand has the distinction of being the very first tank in World of Tanks I ever rage sold. I rage sold this tank. I went up the German lines when I first started playing World of Tanks, and I got to Tier 8 relatively quickly, and I absolutely hated the Ferdinand. I could not stand this tank. It was just too slow, too unmaneuverable. I didn't like this tank at all, and as a result, I sold it after 6 games. So for years, I only had 6 games in this tank on my account, but I didn't appreciate the Ferdinand, which for what it was, because you know, I was relatively new to the game, and even though I much preferred the Jagdpanther 2 and still do, I do admit the Ferdinand has a place in the game, because on rebuying it to get the Ace, I actually found I quite liked the tank. But then again, I've improved as a player, and I play my tank destroyers a little bit differently now. Back then, it was just too slow, too unmaneuverable, and I was playing it too passively. I was playing it like a tank destroyer, and the tank has no camo rating, and, you know, lots of higher tier tanks are going to have no problems killing a Ferdinand. It's only really effective armor-wise against lower tier tanks. Now, in real life, the Ferdinand was pretty much of a disaster in almost every single way. It really, really was. How this tank came about, or how this assault gun came about, was when the Tiger was being developed, 2 prototypes were put forward, one by Henschel and one by Porsche. Now, Ferdinand Porsche was so confident that his Tiger P, or Tiger Porsche, design was going to be accepted that even before the contract, or the winner of the contract, was announced, he had gone into and began production on the Tiger P. As a result, the Tiger H, or the Henschel Tiger, was the one that was chosen. The Tiger P was abandoned, and as a result, as I say, Ferdinand Porsche had already put it into production, and he had already built 100 Tiger P chassis. Now, these chassis were just lying around. They had their engines, they had their drive transmissions, they had everything, but they were just lying around. So as a result, in order to rescue something out of the Tiger P project, they designed the Ferdinand, which basically came by mounting a huge box on top of the Tiger P chassis and giving it an 88mm gun. This particular gun on the tank is not historically accurate, but it would have left absolutely no room in the compartment with this gun, but, you know, balancing reasons. But the Tiger P, yeah, it was a Tiger P, even though it eventually became the Ferdinand assault gun, named, as I say, after Ferdinand Porsche. It's a very, very well armored tank, just like the Tiger P was designed to be. If you're a lower tier tank and you're facing a Ferdinand, you may have problems dealing with this tank from the front, because unlike the Jagdpanther 2, which has speed and mobility on its side, the Ferdinand is all about its armor. The upper hull is about 200mm thick, although there is some slight angling going on, which means it's actually closer to about 210mm thick. The midplate, about 200 to 210mm thick. The upper glacis about 200 to 210mm thick. So pretty much the front of this tank is 210mm thick, or thereabouts. You need a high penetration gun to hurt this tank in a lot of its strongest armor. However, there are weak spots. First weak spot is the lower glacis, which is only about 160mm thick, maybe even a little bit less, depending on the angle you get on the lower glacis. So lower tier tanks might want to aim at the lower glacis, but there are also 2 traditional weak spots that the Tiger P also has, which are hidden behind these headlights, and a lot of people don't understand or don't know that these are weak spots. You're going to see that players shooting at me in this game don't realize that these are weak spots either, because the armor is angled just like it is on the Tiger P. Now, usually angled armor is better than flat armor, but not in the case of the Tiger P or the Ferdinand, because frontally, while this may be 200 to 210mm of armor on this plate, when you get to shoot these angled sides, this drops down to about 150mm, 160mm. So it's weaker from the front than most of the front of the I was going to say tank, but the assault gun or tank destroyer. Now it gets worse, because the Ferdinand can also, it's a very boxy tank, just like the Tiger, but you can angle it. And by angling the Ferdinand, what you're doing is you're increasing the frontal armor to about 220mm thick. You're also, even though the side armor is not amazing, increasing when the Ferdinand angles. This is actually about 260mm of effective armor on the side, so you can side scrape in the Ferdinand. But what you're doing and you shouldn't do if you're fighting experienced players, is expose this, because this flat area or this angled armor is no longer angled when you try to angle the tank. As a result, you flatten up this armor and it goes from about 150 millimeters of effective armor frontally to angled flat armor 90 millimeters. So if you're trying to fight a Ferdinand and you have to face it frontally, try and shoot it here, try and get it when the Ferdinand driver is angling his tank, and then it's only 90 millimeters thick. But if you can, and there's any option to do it, just get to the side and get to the rear, because the side and rear armor is dreadful, like it is on most forward-facing TDs. So you can take out a Ferdinand quite effectively frontally if you know what you're doing. Now, in real life, the Ferdinand was a disaster. I mean, just like in the game, if you can get to the sides and rear on a Ferdinand, then yes, you can take it out very easily, and you could do exactly the same in real life, because one of the design flaws of the Ferdinand was the fact that this tank was completely blind to the left and right. It couldn't see what was happening left and right. There were no viewports to the left and right of the tank, so you could be standing, you could have an enemy tank sitting right here, and the Ferdinand would never know because they couldn't see it. There was no way to see it. So later designs of the Ferdinand, before it became known as the Elephant, ended up putting a commander's cupola on the top of the tank, which basically gave it viewports out to the sides. But when it was first developed as the Ferdinand, it didn't have those viewports. Another thing that was really, really interesting, or a bit of a disaster about this tank in real life, is the complete lack of a machine gun. You'll notice that this tank has no machine gun, and that means that it is unable to defend itself against enemy infantry. It can't see the enemy infantry if they're to the left or right of the tank, and it can't defend itself against enemy infantry because there's no means for the crew to defend themselves. So basically, these tanks in real life, when they made their appearance at the Battle of Kursk, they got swamped. A lot of them got swamped by enemy infantry, and the crew were trapped. They were trapped. There was nothing they could do because the enemy infantry were able to swarm over the tank, able to use Molotov cocktails, able to use grenades, and there was no way for the crew to defend themselves. So, as well as a commander's cupola that was added onto the tank later on after the Battle of Kursk, another thing that was added were machine gun to the front of the tank to basically enable the crew to protect themselves against enemy infantry. Once those changes had been made, it was also given a little bit extra frontal armor. Those changes were made they were made in 1944, at which point the tank became renamed as the Elephant. So when you hear people referring to this as the Elephant in-game, it's not quite. It is the Ferdinand, because in this configuration, there's no commander's cupola with viewports and there's no machine gun. Therefore, it's a Ferdinand. But not only was it plagued with those design flaws, because it was rushed into service, and it was part of the reason that the Battle for Kursk, or Operation Citadel, was delayed, because Hitler wanted his new weapons on the front line. The tank was very, very unreliable when it was first released. It suffered mechanical breakdowns, the electrical transmission kept breaking down, and it took a lot of work to try and keep these tanks in service. So that was another issue that problem that the Ferdinand had. And the other problem, or another problem it had, was the tank was incredibly heavy. It was extremely heavy. So normally when a tank broke down on the battlefield, it could be recovered. There were special recovery vehicles to recover broken down tanks or damaged tanks from the battlefield. Now, the Tiger was a very, very heavy tank, and at the Battle of Kursk, it required 3 recovery vehicles to recover a Tiger that had broken down on the battlefield. So not one. A Panzer IV only required 1 recovery vehicle, but a Tiger needed 3. The Ferdinand, when they broke down, and they broke down a lot, they actually needed 5. You needed 5 separate recovery vehicles working in tandem to try and recover a Ferdinand from the battlefield. The tank was just way too heavy, too susceptible to damage, tracks being blown off. The crew were helpless if they were attacked by infantry. It couldn't see what was happening left or right of it, and it was pretty much a disaster. Another thing about the crew, another thing that was quite interesting when I was reading about this tank, is that the crew were separated from each other. The crew could only communicate via intercom because they couldn't get from one part of the tank to the other. The engine was mounted in the center of the chassis, and that meant that the crew at the back of the tank couldn't see or couldn't even talk to the crew at the front of the tank unless it was via intercom. They were completely separated. The driver and the radio operator used to sit in the front, and the loader, commander, and gunner would sit in the rear. I didn't know that until I started doing some research on this tank, but overall this tank was pretty much a complete disaster, and as far as I know, only 3 tanks, or 3 Ferdinands or Elephants, are still in existence today. Anyway, let's get on to this game. As I say, today is all about the Battle of Kursk. 2 tanks I rebought to get Ace Tankers, 2 higher tier German tanks. We are here on Mines. It's a tier 8 game, so I'm top tier. And as I say, when I first started playing this tank, I absolutely hated it. I rage sold it after 6 games, the first time I ever rage sold a tank in World of Tanks. And I can't actually think of any others I've rage sold. There's tanks I raged about, but didn't sell because they were premiums. I don't think I have ever rage sold a tank before. This was the first one. But you're going to see me playing it like a heavy, because this is what this tank is best at, especially when it's top tier. Just because it's a TD doesn't mean I have to play it like a TD. My armor is better than most of the tanks on my team. My gun is better than most of the tanks on my team. The only reason it's not a heavy tank is because it's a forward-facing turret. It can't turn its turret, but other than that, it plays like a heavy, especially when you're top tier. So I noticed that the enemy team didn't advance around the hill, so that's why I'm going up the hill. When was the last time you saw Ferdinand in a position like this? But I want to play aggressively. There is RT on the enemy team, and I'm aware of that. So what I want to do is I want to try and work this corner. I'm going to keep my armor angled as much as I can, going to work this corner because the enemy team didn't come around. It is an encounter game here on Mines, so most of the enemy team seem to have gone the other flank. So I'm just focused on the tanks that are going to be around this corner trying to come up the hill. So now there's a Hellcat there, I know there's a Tiger 1 there. And the Hellcat drives out in front of this gun. We get 475 damage. This is a very, very good gun. It's one of the best things about the Ferdinand. You can see it is... Oh, come on. As an IS-3 drives out in front of me, but it is a 122mm as soon as this pop... Or 128mm, I beg your pardon, better than I thought, which is historically inaccurate. Now I'm being rushed. IS-3, T-44, Tiger 1. You can see me reversing, keeping angled, staying angled. Enemy tanks are bouncing. I tracked the T-44. Now I've tracked him again to prevent him from getting to my side and rear. Tiger manages to pen me because I'm at a bad angle, but I can't angle against all tanks on the enemy team. Come on. No, just missed that shot. So now the IS-3 moves up now. Earlier on I noticed the IS-3 was firing HE, and he's still firing HE, and maybe that's because he doesn't know. Maybe he's using the stock gun, and the 175mm on the 122mm gun is not going to hurt me. Or maybe he's just firing HE because he doesn't know what he's doing. I don't know, but... Anyway, we've taken a little bit of HE damage. Our Chaffee unfortunately decides to roll around the corner at the T-44, but the T-44 has fired. I'm coming around the corner, I'm staying angled. We can take out... Oh yes, 83 damage from the IS-3, but we managed to take out the T-44. You can see that the Tiger put a shot into me, and that's through the lower glacis, because the lower glacis is the weakest spot on this tank. But our team have won the 8-9 lines, and again I'm playing aggressively. I've lost quite a lot of hit points. Annoyingly, or most annoyingly, most of my hit points have been lost against the IS-3 firing HE. Now if he'd been firing AP, there's a chance he would have done more damage, but there's also a chance I would have bounced those shots, just like we've bounced that Tiger 1's shot there. So trying to keep the tank angled until I have to get my gun on target. I'm down to 355, and like a lot of my ace tankers, I end up getting very, very lucky because I, first of all, decide to shoot this Chiri. I thought I saw an outline, thought I had an outline, but I don't. Now it's time to work this corner. The assault on the hill is not that, or has broken down. I noticed that the IS has a stock gun, so I'm not worried about the IS. The IS has absolutely, I have no fear from the IS unless he happens to be firing premium ammunition. So it's just a matter of side scraping. You can see I'm keeping my Ferdinand in a side scraping position, just waiting for these enemy tanks to advance. And for some reason I can't get an outline. I don't know why I can't get an outline on these tanks. The rock formation here, they can shoot me, but I'm not getting any outline. Finally we get a shot into the IS, and you can see when we're side scraping, when we're angled, we can bounce shots. We've just bounced 4 shots in a row. And once again, we're trying to side scrape and hoping that the enemy tanks don't shoot at that angled part that I showed you earlier on, the weak spot. Oh, IS is back. So we take him out with a shot on the move. Now it's a Tiger 1 who's a one-hit kill. And this is where I make a huge mistake. I make an absolutely huge mistake right now because I come around, I thought the Tiger had retreated, he tracks me, and now I'm dead. I am dead. The Tiger has the rate of fire. Look, he has the rate of fire to shoot my drive wheel, but for some reason he's shooting the outer one. He's not shooting the inner one, so he's keeping me tracked, but he's not doing any damage. Why isn't he shooting my inner drive wheel? Oh, he does some damage and then fails to track me, so maybe he got a little bit greedy, but he finally put a shot through my, again, lower glacis. Lower glacis is weak. But he made a mistake, failed to track me again. I got very, very lucky. I thought I was dead, but Tiger made a huge mistake. So just 2 tanks left on the enemy team, a 110 and an IS-6. And while the Ferdinand is not considered quick or mobile compared to the Jagdpanther 2, you can see we're doing 30 kilometers an hour, and we're still quick enough to flank enemy tanks. So 110, IS-6 up here. We've managed to flank in a Ferdinand around the hill. Now we're going to get rear shots. IS-6 is my victim, and again you can see this great gun, this, I don't know, I don't know much about this gun in real life, but 128mm with 246mm of penetration, 490 alpha damage, allows us to easily wrap up, take out the IS-6 for kill number 4. So my first Ace Tanker in the Ferdinand is out of the way, and unlike the first time I played this tank where I rage sold it and played the Jagdpanther 2 instead, I decided to keep the Ferdinand this time around because it's a little slice of history, it's a little bit unusual, it's a little bit different. I like unique tanks, and I didn't appreciate just how unique and unusual the Ferdinand was the first time I was playing World of Tanks. We also picked up a steel wall, we ended up picking up high caliber. Finishing top on XP with 1358, doing almost 4k damage and 4 kills. You know, the Ferdinand, you don't have to play it at the back of the map, especially when you're top tier. You're usually going to have better armor than most of the heavy tanks on your team. You're usually going to have a better gun than most of the other tanks on your team. And one thing I didn't mention during that video is you're usually going to have more hit points. Not only more armor, but more hit points than most of the tanks on your team, especially if you're top tier, because the Ferdinand received a huge hit point boost in 9.13 where it went from 1250 hit points up to 1500 hit points. So the Ferdinand has more hit points than, for example, or it has the same hit points as an IS-3. It's got a lot of hit points, a lot of armor, and you can play it a lot like a heavy tank. You don't have to sit at the back and snipe just because it's a tank destroyer. Anyway, we fired 12, hit 11. It's got a great gun. Same gun as on the Jagdpanther 2. Has nice alpha damage, decent reload, decent penetration. The penetration is only really going to struggle against tier 10s, but if you can hit their weak spots and the gun can do that, I think it's a very, very good gun. Not a lot of need to fire a lot of premium ammunition. You can see that we received 17 hits, and of the 17 hits we bounced 10, and that's just how good this armor is when it's top tier and you're fighting against players who don't understand what your weak spots are. Most of the shots that pen doesn't did damage hit our lower glacis or our unangled side cheeks that are weak spots. We spotted 2, damaged 6, destroyed 4, did 813 assistance damage, and earned 32,000 credits with a premium account. So tier 8 tank with a good game, it's going to make you credits. You know, even though the ammo is not the cheapest, it's not the it is quite expensive. 12 shots and almost 14,000 credits for ammo. If you hit and pen those shots, the tank will make you credit. So, like I said, I decided to keep the Ferdinand because it's a little bit unusual. In real life, it was just a complete disaster. It was originally designed to come with the 88mm that the Tiger used. The gun in-game I was using there isn't historically accurate and probably wouldn't have been able to fit into the tank in the first place, but, you know, it's there. It makes the tank fun to play. Anyway, the tank made its first appearance at the Battle of Kursk, so both videos today are both German tanks that both made their first appearance at the Battle of Kursk. Both had teething problems, mechanical issues, and both, you know, in their early days were disasters before being redesigned and made a little bit better. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.